lucky to have everyone here, and equally lucky to have Drew Pierson here. Drew is a renewable energy project developer with over 10 years of experience. He's currently working as Senior Director of Development at Blue Wave Solar. It's been mentioned a couple of times already, which has delivered over 50 megawatts of solar assets across Massachusetts. And Drew is going to talk today about their experience with the SMART program, developing a dual-use project in Massachusetts, and then also we'll go into a little bit about the tool that Jerry mentioned that they've developed for MDAR. So please welcome Drew.
Thanks, Samantha.
We're a great company. We're a community solar developer based out of Boston. There's a lot you can learn about us. But we've been around for around 10 years doing community solar development, with the mission of revolutionizing energy and increasing access for everybody. We're a certified B Corporation, and we've built out a integrated model here based on project development, community solar sales, and asset management, and our ethos is to expand solar to the 100%. So I'm here to talk a little bit about dual use broadly, and then at Blue Wave. Built a program for dual use at Blue Wave kind of from the ground up for the last few years. And we're at a really interesting time, and we're really thankful to have this conversation with you all and look forward to the discussion that follows. So to put it in perspective, why is it important? I want to talk a little bit about solar. Approximately 1% of land or so, in theory, could power the country. And according to a study by Renew Wisconsin, just to put things into perspective, if they took about a tenth of the land that they currently use to grow corn for ethanol and dedicated it to solar, they could power 50% of the state. So just to kind of put the relative land uses for agriculture into perspective, their analysis was interesting in that 1 acre of corn could provide for ethanol of about 11,000 vehicle miles. If you took that same acre and converted it to solar for electric vehicles, it's around 715,000 vehicle miles, a considerable improvement in the land use efficiency for that purpose. As panels get more efficient and as new technologies such as bifacials and trackers come into play, we're going to crank more kWh out of each acre, which means that when you've got an improving business case for solar in a variety of different agricultural uses, and you've got improving land use efficiency, it really invites a need to rethink how we go about land use planning, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. So some of the pressures on farmland and greenfields, right? Standard solar has been you're sort of following this path of least resistance on farmland and forests, and there's been a lot of impacts. And that's why we're here, is to talk about how we can do things better. How do we improve the standards by which we're developing these projects? At the same time, clean energy goals are ramping up considerably. They're not slowing down. And a small percentage of rooftops, 20 to 30% or so, really are only viable for solar based on any number of technical reasons and financial constraints and risks to the landowner. So taking that into context and then looking at the pressures that farmers face every day in the market, financially, keeping their businesses together, looking at climate change, looking at development pressures from housing and other land use types, and the fact that the existing tools that are at their disposal are still, in a lot of cases, not enough to help them make ends meet, we think that dual-use solar really can be a tool and a really positive contribution to addressing a lot of these concerns. So it means inviting innovations in land use. The solar industry is growing in its knowledge of better land use stewardship principles, and we want to see that accelerate. There's a lot of design and technology innovations at the intersection of agriculture, technology, and solar asset management that we think make for exciting opportunities to think of new models for how we combine these uses. There are policy supports ranging from the SMART program that's been very well designed in Massachusetts to incentives to do any number of different pollinator or grazing types of management regimes. And there's research interest Universities are interested in it. Federal labs are interested in it. We're going to hear from NREL a little bit later today about what that looks like. And there's also interest in the market. Regenerative agriculture and soil management is projected to be something on the order of a $5 billion market in terms of carbon sequestration over the coming decades. And at the same time, there's going to be trillions of dollars of investment in energy infrastructure to help us all combat climate change. So as these worlds convene, this conversation is really important, because if we can get it right, we can actually go a lot further together. And so from that perspective, we think that there are a lot of natural overlaps between how we're thinking about dual use and how other people are thinking about soil management, regenerative agriculture, and creating incentives to increase farm access and leverage the policies and other mechanisms to get farmers back onto the field. And so I think that the outcomes, if we can get that right, is we're really talking about strengthening the resilience of individual farms, of farm communities, and if we can get our management regimes right, rebuilding soil and ecosystems and in the places where we are. And we think that's a really exciting possibility that merits discussion. So all of this is to say, our conversation here today is so we can broaden our perspectives, but sharpen our focus on what goals we want to see out of this sort of merging of worlds. We want to talk about what it means to catalog these benefits holistically, and then at the end of the day, think about how can we blend market and policy to achieve good outcomes. So dual use, in a very sort of basic sense, is the idea of combining large-scale solar with land management philosophies that are rooted in conservation and good agricultural principles to create a multifunctional system. And so we're going to talk about 4 different types that we think about at Blue Wave, touched upon a little bit of the policy mechanisms. But some of the current implications of right now is that there's a lot of new relationships forming between sectors that have never worked together before. From the landowners to the developers to the regulators, but also to the EPCs, the people building the projects, the people who are thinking about actually managing the logistics of a farm, the investors, the operators. These are new conversations happening on every sort of different front, and we think it's a really exciting time to kind of look at this as an open book or a whiteboard, so to speak, on how do we all want to get to a good outcome together. So to talk about the future implications, as Zara and Jerry mentioned earlier, because there is a relative lack of information, we really strongly believe in leveraging these projects to provide good information so that we can inform the development of the market. Dual use is gaining traction. You see it in the media. It's been written about in Scientific American, Fast Company, et cetera. Universities are researching it through formalized programs that have now existed for a good number of years. We've got federal lab interest and technology companies that are thinking about how do they stray between both worlds. So it makes for a really exciting time. And just in a broad look, we see about 12 states that have adopted some form of policy related to dual use. And I'm going to touch upon the 4 types here. And this is to say, how can we frame a discussion around conservation and siting, sort of in a framework that might kind of help put things in their respective buckets. So we've got pollinator-friendly dual use, as was mentioned earlier. So just focusing on vegetation that is resilient and good for insects, but also has deep root systems, improves stormwater infiltration, builds soil. And we think that there are a lot of exciting, for example, outcomes where pesticides no longer necessary in a solar farm if you're letting nature do its thing. And we think that's a really good outcome to encourage. There's also conservation dual use. There's a project in Nebraska that was sited not far from the banks of the Platte River, where the Audubon Society sat down and with the developer, talked about the migratory patterns of the sandhill crane. 600,000 of these birds land on the banks of the Platte River every year in their migration north, but there's fragmented habitat and habitat that, because of climate change, is moving out of Nebraska. So they worked with the solar developer to figure out a vegetation regime that could provide good habitat for these birds, critical habitat, that if you think over the course of a 20-year project is a really important preserve for habitat that is otherwise under threat. So framing solar development from this perspective for any respective state, I think, is really important. There's also grazing dual use, which we'll hear a little bit more about today, but just the idea of utilizing sheep or other ruminants, I guess, to do rotational grazing and take the place of mowers, which we think is a really good outcome. And then finally, there's agrivoltaics, which is what we're going to go into a little bit in detail about today, but raising the panels high enough so you've got free mobility for people and equipment to do farming. Fraunhofer, they're an energy research institute out of Germany. They've been researching dual use for about a decade now, and they published some really good papers and data on their experience with dual use in temperate climates in Germany. So to that end, the way that they framed it and the way that we like to think about it, I think as a collective, but also as a developer and working with farmers, is that we want to increase the total productivity of land together than those uses might be separate. So that's a very general way of saying that we really want to pay attention to detail. Jordan's going to talk a little bit more about the research networks that are here, so I'll just get into what we're doing at Blue Wave. Big picture, we want to prove best-in-class principles for what it means to develop on farmland, but we also want to leverage the 6 cent per kilowatt adder, which is around $2 million or so over the course of a 20-year project per megawatt you develop, a considerable amount of money that should be going to farming and should be going to driving innovation and making development better, number one. But technically two, now three, we want to help farmers expand production. And in that vein, we want to help steer development of solar toward an ethos that is climate friendly, ecologically friendly, and people centered. We think that's really important. And so, like I said, this is taking a lot of collaboration from different sectors, and at the end of the day, we want to contribute to growing the body of knowledge on all sides of this equation so we can look at this holistically. We're doing projects in every category of dual use that I've mentioned, but I'm here today to talk to you about agrivoltaics and our project in Grafton, Massachusetts with the Norton family. I'm also here with Ian Ward. He's a really critical piece of our operation at Blue Wave. He's a farmer himself. He is an NRCS certified farm planner. He does a lot of technical assistance with farms across New England, and he's really been critical in helping us build out a business model that at the end of the day will increase access for farmers on this land by leveraging the financial benefits of this adder. So that said, we're building portfolios around this concept. I'm going to get into the shade tool here in a second that we developed, but again, at the end of the day, we really do value putting funding toward good research and outreach and education to grow the understanding of this concept. So here's an overview of the Norton property. Up here in the north are existing solar projects. The Nortons have owned this farm for 150 years. They did livestock, they did vegetables, they did a lot of different types of cultivation, but it went out of production around 20 years ago because farming wasn't paying the bills. So we were able to develop a couple projects with them and provide lease revenue that has now given them the financial sort of stability to get back into production. And it's really exciting. So the landowner, Paul, he's currently a contractor, but he cannot wait to quit being a contractor and get back to farming, which is what he loves to do. His daughter is working an office job. She's about ready to quit and become a full-time farmer as well. And it's going to start here with this array that we're developing over 2 acres. It's an elevated solar canopy that has a design based off of Fraunhofer's research in Germany, and taking the implications of that research and the positive impacts on the crop trials that they've conducted, we feel really good and positive that there's going to be room to really have a rich and good experiment for what it means for Massachusetts. The second array is around 12 acres, and it's going to feature rotational grazing of cows, around 8 to 9 cows. And we've put this project together alongside NRCS certified soil scientists who put together a nutrient management plan that we put in front of the NRCS field office in Massachusetts and got done as part of our local permitting process with the Conservation Board. And so I'm going to get to some renderings of that, but here's just a quick overview of the small vegetable project. We're starting out in the first few years with strawberries and pumpkins just to kind of help prime things. But the beauty of the SMART program is that it gives us the flexibility to adjust and to adapt and figure out what crops make the best sense for this site and for the shade regime that this project allows for. So there's a lot of research that suggests that tomatoes and other leafy greens thrive under shade of certain degrees, and we think that over the course of this project, we're going to have the room to test that theory and collect the data to see if it's really true. The family is going to be building a commercial greenhouse next to this project to help expand production. So in a very real sense, we're really proud of the fact that we're getting this family back into farming and that they're leading the way. They're showing us what they want to do, and we want to support them in their goals and work together to make this truly a collaborative endeavor. The rotational grazing project, it's already being done. Vermont, we went and we saw a project that was built by RBI Solar out of Cincinnati, and they're designing this racking to withstand cows scratching themselves on the posts. They love the shade, and the landowner, he's got, I think, something on the order of 24 or so heads of cattle out on this pasture. We're only going to start with 8 or 9 on ours, and that was very much driven by the need to be conservative in figuring out how do we create the best impacts on the land possible by starting small. So as I stated before, we've subdivided the project into meadows that formed the basis for soil testing that fed up into the nutrient management plan that's now part of the management framework for this project. And we're going to be working with Ian, we're going to be working with others really to measure the impact on the land, because we're excited that if we can get this right, we can talk about driving carbon back into the soil. We can talk about building new soil, creating good ecological outcomes, but we can't do it without the assistance of people who really know what they're talking about, agricultural scientists and soil people, and we want to help get those people to the table. The beauty of this adder is that it gives us the ability to invest in capital improvements such as irrigation and shelter for these projects, which is what we're doing. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the tool, but again, we based it off of research from Fraunhofer and really felt strongly about the need to enable spatial planning within a solar project that would allow farmers to really kind of help quantify the square footage that would be suitable for a given crop type. It was also validated by Fraunhofer as a third party who has their own tool. So we feel good about the fact that it is at least providing an accurate baseline measure of reductions to direct sunlight. We're also making the code open source because we believe that if other states wanted to adopt this model, that this should be a resource that's made available to the public. It's based on a library of sun angles from different parts of Massachusetts. So in theory, New York or another state could take this tool, plug in their sun angles, and you're ready to go. I think really just getting to the challenges of this first of its type program is that we're moving from experimentation to commercialization. I think that it causes a lot of anxiety, but there is a significant body of knowledge out there that talks about the impacts of shade generally on crops. It's research from agroforestry to plant biology to horticulture, et cetera. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're simply an extension of an existing body of knowledge, and that is the type of approach that we, as a developer and community, want to advocate for in the context of a working group, because people have been doing this research, and we all need to be able to speak, from that research at the same time and look at it together. I think that really the biggest challenge is building trust between parties that we're used to working together, but if we can keep good data relevant and on the table, we can find ways to align our incentives and achieve common goals. I think the university extension network is going to be a really important and key part of that process, and we look forward to supporting and fostering those relationships with each project that we do. As Jerry mentioned, there are going to be new ways that we can think about incorporating principles of agronomy and the science behind photosynthesis and how plants respond to shade and light into our understanding of the tool. Depending on your location, the intensity of sunlight in a shade regime is different. So you could have a different concentration of photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR, that might be different in Arizona versus Massachusetts versus New York. So I think part of the science in the coming years is looking at how do we actually measure this data and then correlate it back to a shade profile that is projected for your given area, and at the end of the day, how do crops respond? So in terms of New York, I think there's a lot of really exciting policy movement around soils. 270 state bills have been introduced or passed in the last 5 years across the country regarding soil conservation. And we want to plug into that momentum. There are private markets building real incentives around good soil management and looking at farming as a climate solution. We want to offer our projects as test beds to be able to help disseminate and develop knowledge that will be critical for getting everyone on the same page about how we can all do that together. I understand that the American Farmland Trust may have gotten advanced in the Terraton Challenge, so I just want to give a quick shout out. But again, regenerative agriculture we think will lend itself very well to the dual use model, because when you're eliminating tillage, you're talking about a little bit more of a precise approach to farming that actually is very well aligned with the desire to avoid disrupting a solar project. So I think that will be a really interesting area to explore. But we also, again, really want to focus on disseminating this knowledge. We're doing projects in communities that have schools that are affiliated with job training, with research from universities, et cetera. We want to keep the lens wide enough so that at the end of the day, we can have people invited and incorporated into this equation. And I think a key piece of this is that we're leveraging the adder to basically give the farmer a sublease so he can re-enter the site, and we're hiring effectively what are technical assistance managers that will be working between the farmer and the solar asset owner to ensure that farming is not just occurring, but perhaps occurring well. How can we incorporate as much of this new and evolving knowledge into this farming process? And it'll be folks like Ian and others that we're going to be involving through the use of the adder to help kind of advance the knowledge and human capacity to get this done in a good way. So at the end of the day, what it might mean for New York, really want to encourage everyone here from government and policy, academia, research, all these different sides to think about what are your agricultural strengths, what does it mean for the strengths to be at the center of your energy, agriculture, and climate policy, what kind of economic development goals do you really want to achieve as it's balanced against your siting and conservation needs as well, and then how do you look at roadmaps that New York has already put in place to lay a good foundation. Understand that Cornell recently came out with a roadmap for revitalizing soil across the state. So I would point to resources like that as a good starting point for discussion to get everyone on the same page about how to possibly approach it. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, and thank you.